Hey, so here's the second video that I want to talk about today. This one's going to be a little bit more of a hot button issue, I'm sure. But this comes up all the time, and I think it's important to talk about it. So I'm going to get right into this after mentioning a couple of things. I mentioned on our last video that MCERC is putting all our content on YouTube to make it easier for everybody to access. We have a lot, so it'll take a while, but it would help us fund our whale research and our programs if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a really easy, painless way. And once we get enough subscribers, then we get some advertising that goes in the banners and that helps us monetize. And then it's your way to directly support marine conservation, and in particular, our conservation of whales in the ocean and their habitats that they live in. So if you could do that, that would be a big help. The other thing is that we're trying to consolidate all the responses that we get in social media and our posts, and YouTube is the place that makes the most sense for us to do that. So we'll be uploading our content directly to YouTube and then sharing it throughout social media from there. So if you want to access any of it, that's the easiest way. But on our Facebook platform in particular, as we grew, we have more pages. So we'll be consolidating everything to our main MCERC page. So if you're in the Puerto Rico humpback whale page, the Turks and Caicos humpback whale page, the manatee page, if you could please go over to the main page and join that instead, follow us there. We're going to shut down the other ones so that we don't spend a crazy amount of time building things on social media, making sure it gets in so many places. That would be a big help as well, and you won't miss any content. So if you could do that, that would be great. And we've been mentioning we have a fundraiser going on now so that we can bring the boat that was donated to us that's in California back to Tampa. We had a surprise donation of a really perfect research boat for us. So what we did to try to make it easier for people to support whale conservation and research and protect their environment and these animals that are so charismatic is to post on our website under the donate page 37 humpback whale song clips that our team has collected during research in the field. So for $1, if you click on one of those, whichever one you want, and you put in the shopping cart, 100% of that goes to our whale research. So we would really appreciate your support going to the website and just picking as many as you'd like. If everybody that follows us on all our social media platforms even downloads one of those tracks, that makes all the difference between being able to get that boat over here and getting started, getting into the field on that, and making it possible for you to join us and actually do some of the research in our programs. So I'm going to thank you for that right off the bat. That leads me to the next topic that comes up all the time. In my research, studying humpback whales and killer whales in particular, I use a lot of evolutionary biology. Now, my background before I started doing marine biology research is in clinical laboratory medicine and as a paramedic. And what that does is give me a kind of unique, broad base of knowledge to pull from, where when I see something happening in the environment as far as the behavior of a whale, my first thought is, how are they doing that? What body parts are involved? What's the chemical reactions that's happening in these amazing charismatic creatures' bodies? And why? What's the reason for that? Because if it's happening, there's an advantage to it happening as long as it's more than one individual. So if I see one whale do something unusual, that may just be a one-off, an anomaly. But if a whole group of whales are doing a certain behavior, then there's definitely a reason for that. And that's explained through evolutionary biology. So behavioral ecology is the study of behaviors in the context of these animals' environment, their habitat, and everything that they interact with directly and indirectly. And then using evolutionary biology to kind of take a look back and say, if I'm seeing this now, and there's an advantage to it, then any other species that's related to these whales should have something similar that kind of explains why that trait would survive generations. And so that brings me to what I really want to talk about, which is the discussion on social media about evolution. I have never really liked, even as a student when I was young, and now as an instructor for all these decades, the way evolution is explained. We have key phrases you'll probably recognize that, especially if you're in the States, because that's where my education is, we say things that you'll have heard over and over again, but it doesn't translate well. And so what I don't like are the conversations on social media that happen between some religious groups, and in particular Christianity, whatever path you follow in that umbrellas under Christianity, discussions of evolution, because the whole concept that humans are descended from monkeys, that we evolved from monkeys, is just so inaccurate. And it lays the foundation for an emotional response to that particular thing. How could that possibly be true? And I want to preface the rest of this conversation by saying I don't see a conflict between science and religion. I don't see that they need to be incompatible. And that's what I'm going to attempt to explain here, how we can have these conversations respectfully and why it's important to do that. So let's return to that original question. Humans are not descended from apes. We did not evolve from apes. What happened was, way back in the history of our actual genetic and makeup, how did we become humans? What really happened is that we have a common ancestor. And the further you go back in time, the more species that have evolved and that are around now find a common ancestor. So what does that mean? Well, let's kind of put this in the context of some specific examples. If you are, I use this actually kind of abstract one in my classes a lot, that let's talk about coyotes and rabbits. If you're a coyote and you eat rabbits, then if you can't catch a rabbit, you're not going to survive. And that means you're not going to survive and have offspring. So a coyote that's fast enough to catch a rabbit is the one that's going to survive and have offspring. But a rabbit that gets caught by the coyote won't. So what that means is that the fastest coyotes get a meal, but the fastest rabbits escape and have offspring. That means that if the coyotes don't keep up with that, let's say some rabbits are born and they live in a very green, grassy area. The rabbits that can blend in the most in that environment are the ones that will survive the coyotes being able to catch them. But the coyotes that may be able to have a better insight and be able to look and see and find ways to flush out those rabbits that are hiding, they're the ones that are going to get a meal and survive. And so what happens is, through time, whatever the species, the individuals in any group that have a trait that allows them to survive are the ones that will go on and have young. So in the example that I posted today, because I end up seeing these conversations often, I talked about humans being a meal for lion pride. So if you live in a place where there are lions that regularly pursue humans as part of their meal, their menu, then if you're one of a group of siblings, let's say there are 10 kids in a family, if you can run faster and find a place to hide and not be caught, then you'll survive. But also, if you're one of the smallest siblings and you can fit into a hole and hide where you're not found, then you'll survive. And maybe your siblings in the middle that can't run as fast, or that aren't small enough to fit into holes fast enough, they won't survive. So that means now you have the tall, lanky, long-legged siblings that survive, and the short, thin siblings that can hide in holes that survive. And they're the ones that will have offspring. So generation after generation, these two groups now will meet other challenges, and the descendants that survive are the ones that have the traits that let them deal with whatever challenges they have in their environment. So way back in history, the common ancestor of humans would have met challenges that advantages that look more like what modern apes have in their physical and even the ability to reason things out. Those are the ones that survived. And so their descendants are able to pass on one set of traits and keep changing those traits. But there was another line that looks more like us that survived. And so you can, like the long-legged siblings and the short, thin siblings surviving lions, you can have from a common descendant many branches come off. And that happens by the individuals that meet the challenges of that time. And you'll have heard that worded in other ways that we pass on, but I don't think it's explained well. So we're not descended from apes. We didn't evolve from apes. We didn't look like apes. We had a common descendant, and whatever was in the habitat that let individuals survive, and it clearly was multiple sets of things that challenge and that let us survive in different ways. Then you branch off, and that's what succeeds. So I think that's very difficult. I have a lot of conversations with my Christian friends and acquaintances. This comes up all the time. And we have respectful conversations. We talk about these things. And the emotional trigger of believing in an omnipotent God and then implying that you are made from something that isn't viewed as perfect as a human being is an emotional trigger. You've shut down the conversation at that point. So by backing that off, I think that's important. But that kind of leads to the next point, that I ask two questions to my Christian friends when we get into these conversations. The first one is, isn't evolution the way I just explained it? Surviving challenges and having offspring if you do. And so over time, surviving many, many challenges that kind of let a certain characteristic of whatever species survive. Isn't that meeting the discussions I hear about how Christians view God, that there's a plan, there's a perfect plan? And doesn't it make sense that if you were an omnipotent being designing a group of beings, of humans, and you want them to survive, that the way to do that very cleverly would be to make sure that there was a built-in plan on how generation after generation survives. So evolution makes sense that if you see God as a creator that put humans down here, that there would be a built-in system that says, how do we make sure that humans survive? And survive potentially forever. That's the concept. And then secondly, doesn't it make sense that God would have planned for humans to understand that? Because when I've attended and I've attended a lot of different religious, churches or whatever building, whatever group gatherings there are, and I don't want to pigeonhole that because there are so many, that the conversations that I see from leaders in those religious communities is that there's always a plan. So it makes sense to me that with all the specialization that humans have when we're in communities, whether you're a mechanic or a physician or whatever, that scientists would be part of that big plan. That you have people there, and that if you don't believe and trust that group of people that God put there, then aren't you kind of dismissing part of your own faith that there's a plan to have humans be here forever? There's a plan for all these challenges that are in this big complex planet that we live on, that we interact with, and there's a plan to have people be able to do different things, including scientists that explore and understand that plan and then share it with you. There's not a contradiction there, in my opinion, and I want to hear your opinion. I am not intimately familiar with every religion. I'm not Christian, but I do strive to have these conversations because whenever we understand how we think about things, then I find that we get along better and we can, coexist with all kinds of things that happen. So it seems to me that if you say you don't believe in science or you dismiss what scientists are telling you about evolution, that it's a lot like that story that circulates often about the man who's drowning in the ocean. And there's different versions of this, but just to kind of summarize it, the man was drowning in the ocean and he called to God and said, please save me. I've been faithful to you. I've always believed in you. I've always had conversations with you. I've lived my life, in the faith that you've put here for me. And please save me. Please save me. And then a boat comes by and says, hey, we're going to rescue you. And the man says, no, no, no. I've asked God to save me. And so dismisses the boat. And then a plane or a helicopter comes by to rescue him again, dismisses him. And the man drowns. And then in this story, the man goes to heaven and has a conversation with God and say, I've been following you. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. And I've always believed in you. Why did you let me die when I called for your help? And God said, I sent you a plane, I sent you a helicopter. I've sent you all these things and you sent them away. What else could I do? That's why you're here. So take that story. Did God send scientists in addition to mechanics and farmers and everybody else that has something to do with what our communities are right now? And if you're a person of faith that says there's no such thing as evolution, and I don't believe scientists when they tell us that, then aren't you kind of pushing away those things that you were gifted to understand the big plan? And I want to know the answer. I want to know your answer to that. I truly want to know your answer to that. Usually when I bring these things up, my Christian friends, because this is the conversation that usually comes under that particular umbrella that has the biggest pushback on evolution, in my experience, my personal experience, that I usually get my friends that stop and say, and then we continue. We have conversations about it and they go in all different directions. And I really like that. So I'd like to hear your take. But here's the thing. If we're going to have a conversation about this, there are some guidelines we need to have, right? First, we need to be respectful. So any personal attacks or whatever, any, ridiculous name calling, that's going to be deleted or ignored. We're not going to get into that. That's not what this is about. This is about actually having respectful conversations. So if you say something is part of your faith, fair enough, define it, own it, that's okay. But if you say it's a fact, then you need to support that. That's what scientists do. We don't say this is a fact. We might say it's a hypothesis, which means it is an idea. It is something that we looked at and said, I wonder. And it's usually based on other things that we know about. And then we go and take a look at that. So if we claim it's a fact, it means it's something we've looked at and it's been tested, observed, and that's happened repeatedly so that we can support that with confidence. And if we have a hypothesis, that's what we call, hey, this is what we think it is. And if you are coming at this from a scientific point of view, that's important, not just blowing off people of faith and saying, hey, that doesn't exist. And if you're coming at it from a religious point of view, if it's a matter of faith, you just believe that, fair enough, bring that into the conversation. But if you say something's a fact, you have to support it with proof, with data, with something that is more than just I think so. And that means references. Go tag us on stuff. But remember, newspaper articles have bias. Of course they do. That's the nature of what they do. And if you tag us on a person who's a person of faith, but they're just expressing that, that's not supporting a fact. That's supporting something in your faith. That's fair, but it's not a fact. So you need to be able to go look at something that's been tested and proven and repeated. And then we can have a conversation with that. Now, now that we know that we're going to have this respectful conversation, scientists are not going to get on here and with impunity, because as my last video said, we hold people accountable. Just because you're invisible on the internet doesn't mean that we're not going to call you out on stuff. But we'll do it respectfully. No mean girl, no name calling, none of that kind of ridiculous stuff. But I will say I have kind of a tongue-in-cheek response when people that are scientists say there's no place in science for religion. And I personally think a lot of things that are brought up as faith are hypotheses, but they're just not scientifically tested. And I'll say to everybody here who's a scientist, whatever level of science you are, whether you're a citizen scientist that does a lot of reading, or whether you have a PhD in something related or you're a theologist, I do want to give you my tongue-in-cheek response. And we are, as scientists, not going to go down here and say, those just really not very nice comebacks that don't have a lot of value except to try to call somebody that has a religious belief something worth less than those of us that do science. And I happen to have my own paths that kind of mix them together. But here's what I tell my scientist friends, especially my marine biology friends: blue whales. Blue whales are the biggest animal on the planet. They live in the ocean. There's a lot of them. And we have never seen a lot of things about them. In a lot of places, we have no idea where they come together, where they mate, where they give birth. There's a lot of things we don't know about them, and they're the biggest animal on the planet. We have evidence to support that they actually do mate, reproduce, and have young, of course, because we see the young. But there's a lot of pieces that we don't have evidence about. And so we have evidence that we form hypotheses on. And we don't necessarily see everything that we know is out there. And I will tell you that people of faith will tell you that they have similar experiences. And it is human nature, wherever you believe it comes from, to explain things that you don't understand. That's what we as scientists do. And so to give people a hard time for finding explanations for things that they might otherwise not be able to understand just seems unethical to me and just disingenuous. And so give that some consideration. Now, having said that, having talked about evolution very briefly, that's a conversation I probably should make another video recording about in more depth and kind of take those vignettes out a little bit so that they make more sense. If we as scientists explain evolution and define why scientific theory is different than the word theory that we see all the time. And for those of you that are watching, if you have a theory, a lot of time it's an idea. But as scientists, we don't call something a theory unless it's been tested, observed, reproduced, and we have a lot of data to support that it's proven. So the theory of evolution, probably we should retitle that. I don't think we can get that across everybody's desk right now, but it's the reason I just say evolution and not the theory of evolution. So I want to hear your thoughts on this. And I think as scientists, we can do better at explaining evolution. I really do. So that we're getting rid of this conversation about man evolved from apes. That's just, why trigger an emotion and shut down the conversation before you can have some really interesting, thoughtful exchanges where people listen to each other and they feel safe going, I hadn't thought about that before. And here, if you are somebody of religion and you want to say, I hadn't thought about that, good on you for being able to step back and not be triggered and considering it for the time. And if you're a scientist on here and you're able to step back and say, you know what, it's okay to present our science and still accept that people will have a religious view, that they're still explaining things that they can't see and touch. And it might be unsettling to us, but hey, I have argued scientific points, and if you're a scientist, you have too, and have had disagreements. So we can continue to do that the way we always do. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Remember, put your comments in YouTube so that I get notifications and I see them. I can't keep up with all the other platforms. So go to YouTube, to our channel. Please subscribe. Please go to the website. All of it will be in the comments, and donate. Help us get that boat back and have more of these conversations. And feel free to light up these comments. I'm really interested to see where this conversation goes in a positive, respectful way. Cheers.